Hello and welcome to Tech Deals Graphics Card Performance Comparison. We are testing two different graphics cards today. The Asus Republic of Gamers Strix GeForce GTX 1070 versus the EVGA for the win GeForce GTX 1080. We are testing these cards today installed in the same computer. The $1,500 custom build PC with the Intel i7-7700k CPU running at 5 GHz. There is a complete video series on this custom build linked in the video description below. Parts overview, the behind the scenes Y vlog, the build video, system setup, Windows installation, Windows performance review, many game tests, storage performance, all linked in the video description below. We are testing today at two different resolutions, 1440p at ultra detail and 2160p at high detail. Anti-aliasing and VSync are both turned on. Please note that VSync has to be on. Fallout 4's physics engine requires it. If you run this game more than 60 frames per second, then the game world, the physics engine simply doesn't work. So we're not looking for maximum frame rates here. Instead, we're looking to see that the minimums are as high as possible. What we're watching right now is the GeForce GTX 1070 at 1440p resolution, ultra detail preset. If you look at the top of the screen, you will notice something. Our GPU is not getting 100% usage. It's bouncing between 60 and 70% most of the time. This is because we are frame locked to 60 frames per second. The actual average performance in this game is going to be close to 60 frames per second, but we're not interested in the average. Well, we are to a point, but we're mostly interested in the minimum. GPU temperature is very reasonable. The fan speed is also very reasonable at just 37% or 1300 RPM. Clock speed is a very respectable 2 GHz. That is auto overclock thanks to GPU boost. We have 8 GB of VRAM, but we don't need it. We're using less than 4, and our CPU usage is well below 50%. An i5 will generally play Fallout 4 just as well as an i7. Now, I've commented that an i7 helps in some new modern games, and it does. Battlefield 1, definitely. Fallout 4, it doesn't care as much. An i5 is just fine. Main system RAM usage is also fine. We're less than 8 GB. Now, for open world games, I still recommend 16 GB because there are parts of the world where there's a lot more going on, and as you play and more stuff gets loaded, this will increase. Furthermore, this is a test computer. There's nothing running on this machine except this game. It is a very, very clean installation of Windows, so I still recommend 16, but it will play in 8. Finally, keep your eye on the real-time frame rate on the bottom of the MSI Afterburner numbers. Now, we are right now maintaining 60 frames per second. But look at where we're at. We're out in the wilderness. There's a few dead, broken trees and some bush lying around. We're facing two enemies. But look here, it just dipped down to 50 frames per second. It's not maintaining, and it will not maintain a smooth 60 frames per second. It'll get back there. Here we are. There's 60 frames. When it dips is when you need the performance, and this is a key point, so please make note of this. It's not that it runs at 60 frames per second when you're just running around. Great, that's wonderful, but you're not doing anything except running around. How's the frame rate when you have 5 enemies on the screen, when there's explosions, grenades, and rocket launchers going off? That's the question. Let me give you a short piece of advice. If you have a GTX 1070 and you get into later parts of this game in the cities where it's very busy and you end up in combat with half a dozen enemies, you're going to want to turn down the detail from ultra to high. And you may want to turn off anti-aliasing because it definitely steals performance. Fallout 4 is one of those games where a smooth, steady frame rate is very important. The game engine depends upon it, the physics engine depends upon it. And so while definitely it will average close to 60 frames a second, average frame rates in this game don't matter. It's the minimums that count. So when you look at the results at the end of this, we're going to be mostly comparing minimum frame rates between the two different resolutions and the two different cards, more so than the average or the max, since we are frame locked to 60 frames per second. Alright, that's enough of this card. Let's see what happens when we replace our 1070 with a 1080. Again, everything else is the same computer, same resolution, same ultra detail. Take a look at the numbers in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. Our GPU usage is generally going to be a lower percentage. Of course, it depends on where we're at, but That the reason is because we're still running at 60 frames per second. Now we're down in the 50s, but it does spike. And it's those spikes that the extra performance of a 1080 is going to make up some of the difference. You'll see that in the minimum frame rate versus the average frame rate at the end of this video. VRAM usage is fine, our temps are fine. In fact, take a look at the temp and the fan speed of this For the Win card. We're at 26% fan speed at 800 RPM. This graphics card is basically silent playing this game at 60 frames per second. CPU usage is very low, and our main system RAM usage is also very low. Now, as we get into combat here, oh, that was a big explosion. Watch the spikes, not just in the frame rate up and down, but watch the spikes in GPU usage, that first percentage there. As we are approaching the limits of our graphics card, that's going to jump up into the 70s and 80s, and in a few places, it's even going to hit 90 to 100%. Not very often. If you want to play at ultra detail, believe it or not, a 1080 is needed for 1440p in Fallout 4. Even then, it's worth making note that there are going to be some busy parts of this game where it's still a bit rough, even with the 1080 at ultra detail. Turn down the anti-aliasing, turn down one or two of the settings, and you'll make that problem entirely go away. This game can be very, very challenging. I'm not going to claim it's the most optimized game out there, but the detail settings do make a huge difference to performance. Now, just for fun here, I used some buff out and jet and a few other chems just to get a little bit extra combat performance here. I don't actually use them very often in the game, but hey, it was fun, why not? And these guys aren't going to survive. You certainly wouldn't think so against a minigun anyway. For balance and scale reasons, I think the minigun is underpowered given what a minigun should really be able to do, but hey, I've never fired a minigun in real life, so what the heck do I know? Again, watch the percentage of our GPU. Now, at no point during that combat sequence did I see the frame rate drop below 60 frames per second, but what I did see was the GPU usage go up. So in a game such as Fallout 4, instead of watching the frame rate as much, watch the GPU usage. Once it hits 100%, that's when your frame rate... Ow, that's gonna hurt. Come on, die, you awful creature thing. That's kind of scary. Are we going to run away from him? Yep, let's turn around and get him. 85%. So we're seeing some jumps. There's 86%. There's 88%. There's 94%. There's 100%. We had a short dip there. Those are the points where your frame rate's going to dip. It's not going to have many of them. You could play this game for hours and hours, and the percentage of time you will spend below 60 frames per second will be in the low single digits. It might even be less than 1% of your frames below 60. However, it's those 1% that you need the performance because you're in combat against 5 super mutants and you're going to die if you don't have complete responsiveness of the game. Now this is 1440p. What happens when we throw 4K or 2160p at both of these cards at high detail? Let's go take a look at that. And so here we are at 2160p, otherwise known as 4K, on the GTX 1070. Now the 1070 is not really meant to be a 4K gaming card. It will play many games at 4K at some various detail setting. Fallout 4 is not one of them, certainly not at high detail. Take a look at our frame rate. We're not doing anything yet. We're not at ultra detail, we're at high. We are not engaged in combat. I'm just running around and we're already in the mid 40s. We just dropped down to the mid 30s. It's playable. The minute you get into the cities, the minute you get into combat with 5 enemies standing around you, the minute there's explosions going off, this is not going to be acceptable performance. I'll just tell you that right up front. Spoiler alert, the 1070 will not play Fallout 4 at high detail throughout the whole game in anything approaching remotely acceptable fashion. But that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who has experience playing Fallout 4. Now, if you're new to it or you want to build a computer to play Fallout 4 and you want to play at 4K, 2 1070s in SLI would actually probably do it pretty well, and I will test that at some point. I can tell you from experience that at ultra detail, 2 1080s in SLI actually aren't bad. I did that when I first put together my $4,000 Ultimate machine with 2 1080s in SLI. That's pretty good, but you're spending an absolute fortune to get there. It's a deal of a different sort, I suppose. So take a look at our GPU usage. Now, it's actually dropping below 100% a couple of the times because our CPU is struggling to keep up with this as well. I mean, we've got a really good CPU overclocked to 5 gigahertz. Our GPU is bouncing. It's close to 100%, but it's not quite there. Not all games run well at 4K no matter what hardware you throw at them, simply because 4K is new and it's a challenge. 40 frames, 41 frames per second. Let's see how this combat goes. I'll trim this a bit shorter here, but let's take a look at this. Now we're down into the 30s. Playable. But I'm not facing super mutants. I'm facing mirror lurks, or whatever the heck those things are called. And I've got a minigun. This is not exactly the biggest challenge in the game. Well, maybe for me, because I'm not that great at this game, but look at that frame rate. It's just not there. Now, can you set the detail to medium or low and get 4K playable frame rates on a GTX 1070? Yes, you can, but I would make the argument that the game is actually prettier, nicer to play at 1440p at Ultra than it would be at medium detail at 4K. The higher resolution gets you sharper lines, more detail in the game. But if you have to turn the detail settings down to medium or low to get there, if you have to lose all of the pretty effects, all the shadows, all the lighting, all the textures, then who cares how sharp the images are if it's bland, boring, and ugly? So I submit that 1440p at Ultra is an actual prettier, better looking experience than 4K at low or medium. Just my opinion, but that's where I play it, and that's where I would recommend you play it on anything approaching a reasonably priced computer. Alright, here we are on the last run of this video. 1080 at 4K. The irony is they named this card the GTX 1080, and it's not really meant for 1080p gameplay. I'm sure a lot of people get that confused who aren't necessarily into the whole technology scene. They see GTX 1080, they think 1080p and think, oh, that must go with that. Well, I understand the confusion. It does, in fact, make the most ultimate 1080p gaming card ever, I suppose, but needless to say, I think it's a bit overkill for that in most situations. Look at our frame rate. We are really close to 60 frames per second. Not, well, okay, having said that, we're down in the 45. So I'm voicing this over as I watch this. I recorded it, I took one look at it, and now I'm voicing it over. There we are at 60. At high detail, you're not going to average 60 frames a second even on a single 1080. You'd need two of them, or at least two 1070s and SLI. Fallout 4 does scale pretty well with Crossfire and SLI, so if you're interested in putting two cards together, it definitely gives better performance. It will not hold that at a minimum. What about two cards? Well, I'll do that in a future upcoming video comparing 1070 SLI versus 1080 SLI. And who knows, maybe I'll even put two RX 480s into Crossfire and give it a try there as well, because I know some of you buy one card, wait a year, and then add a second card when you have the funds, and so I'm sure people are curious. I'll probably end up doing it. In general, I think a single 1070 is a better investment than two RX 480s, but I understand that not everybody can afford to do that up front, and there's some really good deals on RX 480s. I'm talking about cards I'm not even reviewing here, but right now you can get RX 480s for less than $200, so those are pretty reasonably priced, although not the 8GB version. The 8GB version will run you about $220 to $240. Look at our VRAM usage. If you want to play at high resolution, take a look at this. We're almost at 5 gigabytes. You definitely don't want to be getting any 4 gigabyte cards if you plan to play at 4K. You want a 6 or 8 gigabyte card. So we'll run this until we fight the mirror lurks again. I'm using the same save game file. I'm going to the same basic places each time to make the frame rate and overall performance consistent from playthrough to playthrough. Again, I know I'm not in the most complex area of the game, but at least it gives consistency from run to run. It's a nice length of a run. It doesn't make the video too long, although as I say this, we're at 14 minutes. I'm trying to keep these videos about 10 minutes long. My apologies for the lengths of this, but hey, I hope you guys enjoy it. And we're skipping ahead here because the mirror lurks were not where they were supposed to be. I spent too much time, I guess, with the raiders, but they're over there for some reason. So we jumped ahead here, and there's the bad guys. Again, look at our frame rate. Our GPU is fully used. Our frame rate is 47, 48 frames per second, and look at that. How in the world is that thing taking this much fire from a minigun? That is insane. Like I said earlier, I've never exactly fired a minigun in my life, so I don't really know, but I have a feeling from watching YouTube videos that I would not want to stand on the business end of one of these things. Then again, you couldn't run around and carry it like this anyway, so it is what it is. Alright, let's go take a look at the results. And here we are at the results. Let's deal with the 1440p numbers first. Average and maximum frame rates are right at 60 and 64 frames per second respectively. If you only looked at averages, you'd think there was no point in having a GTX 1080 over a 1070. Now again, we're at ultra detail, but look at the minimums, the blue lines. 41 frames per second minimum on the 1070. 56 frames per second minimum on the 1080. That is a 36% increase on the 1080 over the 1070. That is a huge difference, 15 frames per second. It makes a lot of difference to the smoothness of the game. If you want to play at ultra detail at 1440p, you need a 1080 as far as I'm concerned, because keep in mind, this is not the busiest part of the game. It gets worse as you get later into it. Now, you can lower the detail from ultra to high. You can turn off anti-aliasing or turn it down, make a few other changes, and the 1070 is much more playable if you do so. What about 4K or 2160p? Neither card at high detail is really what I would consider to be ideal. 44 and 52 frames per second. It's playable, but if you look at the minimums, again, we're not in a busy area. 32 and 35, it's pretty bad. You can absolutely turn the detail down to medium or even low, but the minute you do that, you've got a high resolution. The lines are sharp, but the game is pretty bland looking. I think 1440p at higher ultra is a better choice than 4K at lower medium. Or SLI, two 1070s or two 1080s. How much do you want 4K at ultra and how much are you willing to throw money at it? I'll cover that in a future video. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below this video. Post your comments below the video, and as always, check out the video description. Links to both Amazon and Newegg for both of these cards, and for all 1070 and all 1080 cards will be down there. Links to buy Fallout 4 at a discount at several sites will be down there, and a link to my full video series on the $1,500 i7-7700k build that this test was run on will be down there as well. If you have not seen it, go check it out. Tons of videos on that computer. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.